Hi, this is Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. Open and honest discussions with wise and skillful teachers about their experiences with life, death, and Buddhism. If you wonder how others on the path have dealt with death and dying and grief, then be sure to listen in. Everybody has a story, a perspective, and a valuable lesson to share. Embrace death, live a full life, and learn how to love impermanence. Because as my dear father used to say, nobody gets out of this alive. Hello there. Welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. Before I introduce our wonderful guest for today, I have some exciting news that I want to share with you quickly. And that is that in September, my next book will be ready for you. And it is called Sitting with Death, Buddhist Insights to Help You Face Your Fears and Live a Peaceful Life. And the book is based on the wisdom that I have been receiving from a group of people I call my 12 wise teachers. You will recognize them because you've been listening to them on this podcast. And on that note, today I'd like to introduce you to Mary Stancavage. She's a Buddhist teacher, and she has been empowered to teach Buddha Dharma for over 15 years. She would be typically in the Los Angeles area. She's been Zooming internationally, just like many of us during this past year. She leads retreats and day-long meditation sessions. You can find her at marystancavage.org. That's Mary, Stancavage.org. And she has a fun fact, which is that she has been an archaeologist. She worked as an archaeologist for about 8 or 9 years, and she's not really completely out of that because she does still do some editing of some of the results that are coming back from digs. And that makes her uniquely comfortable with some aspects around death, but there's more. And let's jump to it so that you can hear. Thanks for being here. Here we are. When I reached out to you and you so graciously accepted and answered me because I was a complete unknown to you, a comment you made was that you were happy to talk about one of your favorite topics. And so can we maybe start with that, and you can share why this is one of your favorite topics? Because I know that's going to be helpful.
Yeah, the reason I say death is one of my favorite topics is because I don't know if you realize it, but I facilitate a Year to Live group, and I've been doing it for years. I did the practice myself 14 years ago, and it was transformational for me. And what a year to live is, it's living a year as though it's your last year. Mm-hmm. And so you have a terminal diagnosis and you have 1 year to live. And so it's all about coming to grips with dying. Mm-hmm. It's looking at your life, and if you die today, is this what you want your life to be? It's basically creating a life that you want to live, because you die and you're reborn, but it is really becoming familiar with death. And so I did it 14 years ago, and I've been facilitating, I think I've facilitated 8 or 9 groups through this practice. So that's why it is one of my favorite topics. And in Buddhism, it's one of the reflections that we're of the nature to die. So it is something that at the forefront of practice. Anyway, sure. I'm always a downer when people say see you later, and I always go, well, if I don't die, yeah. Or if I die before I see you again, I just want you to know I love you. So
yes, some people don't like that. And I don't say it exactly like that, but sometimes I'll say I may or may not be around then, or if I'm around. And you're right, some people get very upset by that. Like, right. They're so funny. I was speaking to someone the other day and I said, well, I'm not really sure I'll still be here for that. And it was so funny. She's like, you're going to live to be 105. And I said, maybe, I don't know. I'll be here I like to say, I'll be here till I'm not.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I'll be here till I'm not.
And I'll try to be here as long as I can, as long as I'm meant to be here. But, let's go back to a point in time in your life where you first got like that real understanding of like, hey, this death stuff, this is a real thing. As opposed to, I think we all walk around conceptually knowing death exists. But I think a lot of us, there's a point where we go beyond knowing it in our heads and feeling it and knowing it in our hearts.
That's a really interesting question, and I was reflecting on it for a while, and I'm not sure I actually know when that point was, because my father died when I was 5, and
Ah.
so it was a part of my life very early. And then
Mhm.
we had a whole string of animals that died, so that was part of it. My and so it was always a thing. And then, as I mentioned, I was into archaeology, and I would excavate, 4,000-year-old dead people. So it was always a concept that was real. So the idea of death, it's always been there, although it was never at the forefront. It was always just, okay, there's death, there's death.
Mhm.
Um, when you asked about grief, that was a very different animal. I could be clinically aware of death,
Okay.
but the experience of it, I know when I was 5, that was totally incapable of experiencing it,
Mhm.
and it was not in a place where it was tended to. It's
Okay.
like, your father died, he's not coming home again. Here's your dinner.
The
That
end.
was kind of what I experienced. So there was no question, no anything. It was
Okay.
just, yeah, matter of fact, here we are.
Okay. So you grew up, if I can say it this way, you
Mhm,
grew up with death
mhm,
in a functional way. This has happened. Your
right.
father has died. This has happened. This pet has died.
Mhm,
But is it fair to say no recognition of the grief and the emotions that come with it?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, sad because the cat's gone, but not really an ability to be with them or address them, or just, okay, let's get another one. Let's fix it. Let's get another cat.
we do that, don't we? It's
Yeah.
it's interesting, and that's I will say, I think that's an interesting reflection of how we handle grief in terms of when those of us who have pets, which in the United States, so many of us have many pets. That is an interesting thing to see for each of us. How long do we grieve a pet before we bring
Right.
in a new one? That's a whole thing. I like to wait. I have friends who like to get another one right away. And I don't think there's either is the right answer. It's what is the right answer for you,
Exactly.
definitely. Okay, so yeah, let's approach this from a different perspective then, because you grew up with death functionally. How about when do you feel like you first got that understanding or that official taste or first taste of grief? And how
Yeah.
was that?
It's interesting because I'm in recovery, so I also was an alcoholic,
Mhm.
and I get the the two distinct experiences I had when my mother died and my brother died.
Okay.
When my mother died, I was still drinking,
Okay.
and I was in the West Coast. She was in the East Coast. I got home from school. My brother had called my roommates, or called me and talked to my roommates and said, our mom died. So that was the message. Your brother called, your mom died. And I said, give me a beer, because I was not interested in feeling anything.
Right.
So there was no investigation of grief. And I would get angry at people who said, I'm sorry about your mom. It was,
Oh, okay.
it
So
was
no
like,
acknowledgement, right to self-medication.
totally,
Yeah.
absolutely. My brother, I got sober, and then a few years after that, my brother got cancer, and died. And it was night and day,
Mm-hmm.
because I was experiencing, that was my first real intimacy experience, willingness to be with the feeling of grief, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it was, to cry in public at the funeral and at the
Mm-hmm.
wake. And um, so it was really interesting, and welcome, because I had not experienced that before, and I could see the difference between my mother and my brother.
Uh-huh.
How I said no the first time and said yes the second time. And I also had another interesting experience the day of my brother's funeral. He was buried in the morning, and then that evening we were all sitting around with his wife and children and family out back of their house back in New Jersey, laughing. because we were telling stories. And I remember reflecting, going, does this mean I'm not sad? But then I realized, no, it's just this moment. This moment, we're just laughing. And then that the grief would come and the joy would go, and
Mm-hmm.
just the movement of the emotions. And I realized that the grief, it's going to come when it comes. I'd be driving down the road, and all of a sudden a thought of my brother, and I break into tears.
Okay.
So that was my first real intimacy with grief and willingness to experience loss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did that in any way reopen the door, or we could almost say the wounds, right, of the past deaths, like re-examining when your mother died? Or did you kind of like pick up and, I'll say, accept grief into your life with your brother and then forward?
Forward, and then that moving back and examining the death of my parents took therapy.
That makes sense.
Before I could unlock that, primarily my father, because there was no grieving done. Just because you don't acknowledge grief doesn't mean it's not there.
Oh.
And so, at least I don't believe it. I mean, it's there, but if you learn to stuff it, it's going to crawl out anyway at some point. And so it was still there and never tended to. So that when I got into Buddhist practice, because I wasn't practicing when my brother died, I was kind of moving in that direction, but didn't know it. And then I
Uh-huh.
started it a few years later, and then I ended up, when you finally get into formal practice, at least my experience, when you're sitting in meditation and really dropping into the experience that's arising, those things that you've never tended to are still there. And
Oh,
so they're those untended to emotions. Let me just, say it again that way, but it's like, hello, I'm here, unresolved
right.
things that I don't want to feel, that are just like showing up because you've quieted the mind. So the grief was tended to, and then the grief of the mother, and
Uh-huh.
and so yeah, eventually. But yeah, that was my first experience on that road, on that
Okay.
journey.
I was laughing a little bit, not at you, of course, but just at any of us, of because I think so many of us, I mean, I've been this way in my past too. We think we can just keep going and ignore something, and we delude ourselves into thinking that, like, I'm fine, I'm going along my path, I'm fine. And then I love how you said, like, when you sit down in meditation, and I was just envisioning like sitting on the cushion, and all of a sudden this thing shows up and it's like wildly waving at you in your mind, hello, I'm the
Absolutely.
grief you never felt, but I'm here, and it's in your body, and it's with you when you take a drink, or after you chose not to drink, and now it's in your body. And
Absolutely.
yeah, can you talk a little bit about maybe that stuffed down grief? Just a little, maybe add on to that a little bit, like what when you saw your stuffed down grief, maybe you can share a little bit about that with us, the day that you're like, hey, there's grief in here.
Yeah, I think it kind of shows up, and it's almost an insight and an awareness. For me, it all comes out through practice, that it's like, oh, that's grief. And for me, it's not a like a hey, it's been it's been a slowing down of the mind. A lot of times it happens on retreat, or
Mm-hmm.
on a meditation retreat, where the mind slows down and the chatter is gone, and I make space for what's deep, and the implicit memories that color our world, but we don't, they're not conscious, and you make space for them to rise. And it's just being with it. It's just like you said, it's in the body. It's like feeling where that is in the body, usually in my chest or my
Mm-hmm.
belly. That's where a lot of my emotions show up. And just to say, oh, hello, and make space for it, for perhaps the very first, well, a lot of times for the very first time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
These things that have been stuffed and buried, and just say hello, come on up, and holding it with compassion, because my practice, insight practice, there's the wisdom of seeing clearly. It's like, oh, this is grief that's never been tended to. This is the loss of your father, the loss of your mother, the loss of whatever. And compassion, holding it with kindness,
Okay.
is really important. So there's a way to greet it, but be gentle with it.
Okay.
Just let it be there. Not about doing anything with it, but just letting it be there.
Oh, I think that's a valuable thing to think about, is that so something shows up for us in meditation, it doesn't mean a call to action. It's a call to being. Can I say it that way? A call to being, which is
Yeah,
a
and
call to action, huh?
yeah, in fact, Satipatthana is the teaching of mindfulness, the Buddhist teaching on mindfulness, and it's the Satipatthana Sutta is the four foundations of mindfulness. And sati is often translated as mindfulness, but it's another translation and another understanding of that word is being with.
Okay.
So it's not just paying attention to, but being with. There's a teaching around equanimity, of this place of just being steady with
Mm-hmm.
whatever shows up. And my favorite definition of it is a steady, deep intimacy with our experience without preference.
Oh, okay. That's a very powerful phrase. I love that. Thank you. It's just, this is my experience. This is with me now. It's always been with me, but now I'm acknowledging that it is with me, and I don't have to run out and do something. I can just bring a note that this is part of my life. Maybe ultimately, is it fair to say that leads to me recognizing how it is infiltrating my life later?
Um,
What do you think?
sometimes there, it depends. I think everyone is individual and
Uh-huh.
their experience is different. And so I think just allowing it to be there doesn't even have to be an idea to make sense of it or see how it fits in. It'll happen. It'll percolate once you've acknowledged it, once you've had that insight, that clarity of seeing that it's there. Oh, this is grief. Okay. Then it can maybe go away because I'm hungry. Now it's been replaced by hunger.
Ah, true.
And or something funny, and
Mhm.
then you just allow it to come and go, and it's part of what I find. It we recognize it's part of the human condition,
Mhm.
and the more open and vulnerable we are with our own experience, the more connected we are, and we say, oh, it seems counterintuitive, but I feel it's like the more I can tend to these deep experiences of grief, of sadness, of what, even joy,
Yes.
that everyone, there's a recognition that we all experience this. So there's a sense of connection that arises. So
Oh.
there's not necessarily a growth of my story around
Uh-huh.
it, but there's just a letting it be there and saying, this is, I think this is because of my dad's death, and I just, never experienced it, so I don't know how long it's going to be here. I don't know how long grief is going to show up or
Mhm.
not. It's just like, okay, it's still here. It pops up every now and again.
And as you say that, what's come back to me is, during the days when I was going through, so my mother and my husband died close together. And so as I was going through that, I can remember having times off the cushion where things would come up. And because of the teachers who were helping me, and what I was working with, I can remember learning to just kind of say to myself, okay, you're going to be sad now. Okay, you're going to cry now. Because I would have come from the past of definitely like, don't cry now. And, you're about to be in front of a group of people, you can't cry, and, all that. And it's like, no, this is what's happening. This is how it's going to be now. Or, like you shared about telling the fun stories about your brother after he died. It's like, oh, now we're laughing, but yeah, definitely that was the thing that came up for me, is just that recognition. That was so helpful. Just that recognition of like, this is grief right now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
let
with
it
it.
do it.
Just go with it.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
can't say I always liked it, but
No, it doesn't mean it's doesn't mean we want it to be there.
Mhm.
And the thing about seeing it's there is not necessarily being subsumed by it. We're not taken over by it. It's
Right.
like with any emotion, anger. It's like, oh, here's anger. It doesn't mean I have to become angry. It's
Right.
just like, oh, it's there. Hello, acknowledge it.
Mhm.
Hello, grief. It doesn't mean I have to crumple into a heap on the
Mhm.
sidewalk. It just means, okay, there's some grief here. Let me tend to it. Let me be gentle with it.
And I think that we're really covering this, but I'm curious, is there something like if you needed to put your arm around a friend and teach about grief, what would you teach to someone who was just coming to terms with the concept of grief? What would you say?
I would say it's a natural response to loss.
Mm-hmm.
It's a natural response to loss, and it's never as bad as we think it's going to be.
That's
The
true.
the experience of grief or the
Mm-hmm.
experience of sadness or the experience is oftentimes never what we're afraid of. Like, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'll survive when you die, if we say to a loved one. And then when it happens, it's like never what I thought it was going to be. So just open to it, and not this, and if it's new, open to it, put your toe in the water, and then if you need to step back, step back.
Okay.
You don't have to jump in 100% right away. I think being compassionate towards your own experience is really important. People think I have to face this, and they get this like I have to do it, this striving to, you know, achieve total oneness with grief or whatever it is. And
Yeah. Jump in.
instead, just ease yourself in, find support. The feeling, I think it's different and for everyone, but also no, there's no time frame on it. I have found that people want to say, okay, it's been 6 months, aren't you done yet? And I
Yes.
noticed that with my,
Absolutely.
and there's no time limit, no time. I still come up with some grief around my father's death, and we're
Mhm.
talking 60 years, okay? So it's like, okay, here it is. I found that when my brother died, and my sister-in-law was getting that from people, it's like, okay, it's been a while,
You should
and
be fine now.
you should be fine now. And
Yeah.
it's like it has a life of its own, and allow it to do what it needs to do.
It's interesting because I found the time frame is that people want us to be over it is 3 to 6 months. And as you were talking, I had this mental flashback to going to a neighbor's house for a party after my husband Ed had passed, and knocking on the door, and the person who opened the door, I could also see on her face that she's like, "Oh God, I opened the door and it's Margaret," you know, and and then she kind of started stuttering and stammering, and I'm sorry that I didn't reach out to you. And then finally she arrived at, well, it's been 6 months. You should be fine now. And I will say in that moment, I don't know how your sister-in-law felt, but or how you felt in several situations. I guess in that moment, I felt like socially my job right now is to make this person be okay or to leave. Right. And so,
Yep.
yeah. So yes, that's how it is. There's the time limit, I think, that people put on us if they haven't been through it, or if they went through it differently and they don't ever want to have
Hmm.
to think about it again.
Hmm.
And then there's the real world where there's the concept of time and grief, like there's no such thing. Just
Right.
time, there's grief, and it happens.
Yeah, that what you said is really to the point. I realize that people want you to be over it because they're uncomfortable.
Yes.
You make them uncomfortable.
Yes.
So,
And you will find that your friend group, and I'm sure your sister-in-law went through this too, and your friend group changes.
hmm
Or even, when you were in school and your brother died, that you had friends who were all in trying to help you with it, and the others that were like, peace out, Mary.
I had an experience, and again, that's the dividing line is for when I got sober. When
Mhm.
I had a job, and my boss, his mom died, and he went back to Connecticut for the funeral, and then he came back, and I walked out of my office, and I looked, and I saw him coming down the hall, and I turned and ran the other way because I had no idea what to say to him.
Okay.
So I would avoid rather than saying anything because I had no clue how to deal with the grief
Yeah.
or sympathy or anything. I had
Mhm.
no connection with feelings. And so that coming from that space, the willingness to embrace feelings because there's less isolation when you are willing to turn towards. There's a teaching I'm enamored of, and it's kind of the lens I see the world through, which is living with an undefended heart, which means really being willing to be open to whatever shows up. That's that teaching of equanimity, that deep intimacy with our experience,
Mm-hmm.
watching how we've armored ourselves for good reason. I mean, when
Yes.
you're a 5-year-old and you have no clue, it's like, okay, I'm just going to go over here. Or for whatever our
Mm-hmm.
experiences, we take care of ourselves in whatever seems to make sense, but it doesn't necessarily serve us. We move into habits that are maybe more dismissive or running away or denial.
Mm-hmm.
And so to really work at chipping away at that armor so that we can be true and vulnerable and open to whatever shows up, whatever experience, that undefended heart. We don't have to protect ourselves. We can actually be vulnerable because
Mm-hmm.
that's where connection and belonging come from, which is how we get through grief,
Yeah.
to be able to be connected with others.
So that is beautiful. So you've mentioned the undefended heart, and you've
Hmm.
mentioned the Satipatthana Sutta.
Hmm.
And what else do you think was helpful to you that you think would be helpful to others? A teaching, a meditation, or even a mantra or a
One of my favorite mantras is right now it's like this. It's a way to really center yourself, get out of the habit of mind, get out of when your mind is like running. And if it's difficult, it's like, okay, right now it's like that. Not in an indifferent type of way, but a really
Mhm.
bringing yourself to, okay, what is happening right now? What is this? Right now it's like this. Okay, it's uncomfortable. It's in my, where is it in my body? It just kind of is a pause button. So
Mhm.
that is a little mantra that I love. It's a place to bring me to equanimity, to balance, to not being overrun by my thoughts and fears.
Mhm. I think that's great. Was there anything that you found surprising in your experiences with grief and death and anything?
It's not, yeah, it's not anything to be afraid of. Because especially in this culture, it's
Uh-huh.
a culture of denial. It's a culture of, make this corpse look pretty so that we don't know they're actually dead.
Mhm.
It's hiding. Ram Dass, who passed away, I think this year or last year, he tells a story. I think it was his grandmother was in the hospital and she was terminal. She was really dying, and nobody would acknowledge it. The doctors would remember the days when doctors wouldn't even tell you were dying,
I do. I do.
and they wouldn't acknowledge it. And he finally spent some time with her and said, "You're going, aren't you?" And she goes, "Yes." She knew it, but nobody
Ah.
around her would talk to her about it because she could tell it was she was on her way out. And so to just let it be a normal part of life,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
That it is a normal part of life. It doesn't have to sit on a shelf somewhere. It doesn't have to be, you know, singled out as, oh, let's give them some room. I mean, we can have kindness and compassion, but allow it to be part um, of how we move through the world.
You're right. I had one of my grandfathers was definitely an old school doctor. And I mean, he was probably born in early 1900 and he practiced until he was 90. And he definitely came from the don't tell them thing. And even when his own, and I only know this from family lore, when his own sister was dying, he wouldn't tell her. He would just say, "You're going to be fine.
Hmm.
You're going to just be in the hospital and then you're going to be fine." And I think some family members called him out on that. And he was a person, and this I do remember, who wasn't used to being questioned, but his perception was, well, probably she's going to die, but maybe she won't. And telling her is just going to upset her. And that robs us of the ability to prepare for that peaceful death.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And do what we need to do if we have to say anything to anyone. I've been fortunate to be with people who've died at the moment of death, and I've
Mhm.
watched people who have been really at ease and watched people who have fought.
Oh,
And so, I think if you can acknowledge that it's death and dying and grief and loss are part of, it's not separate from, it's actually part of what we do as we move through the world,
mhm.
that it normalizes it so that it can be greeted um, more wisely And you don't have to do it alone. You can, be honest with your loved ones, be honest with people, and allow them to walk with you. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so important to have that and to prepare and not leave your family in the lurch.
Oh, yes,
There's
that's
that piece
true.
too.
There's so much preparation. I mean, there's the emotional preparation, there's the materialistic preparation.
Right, right.
But I do think that the easier that we can, when we know, I mean, well, we always know, we just don't know when, right? So when we can leave things in as best order as possible. I know my mom, I jokingly, I would have said I didn't realize what a control freak she was. But also, how helpful was that? Because she had this notebook she and my father had created together, and then she managed it after he died. And when it happened, this notebook told me everything she wanted me to do. And so, yeah, on the one hand, okay, mom, control freaky that you actually said that you wanted cheesecake at your wake. Okay, but awesome, we had cheesecake, and I knew I was doing the right thing, right? And since the timing was that she died when someone else died, I don't know where I would have been without her preparation,
Right,
you know?
right, right. My sister-in-law has that. She's the same way. She's
Uh-huh.
80 and I'm her executor, and she has a kick the bucket binder,
There you go.
which has all that's and the insurance policies and everything. Pink
Yeah, and it
slips. Yeah.
just makes it helpful. So because there's a business aspect of it. There's a business aspect of it. Well, let's
Can
see.
I say one more thing?
Yes, that's what I wanted to get to is what do you want to say that I haven't asked you about?
Well, you asked me this, but it just pops into my head. There's two
Yeah.
other things. There's the five remembrances in
Uh-huh.
Buddhism.
Uh-huh.
I'm of the nature that monastics say every day, and is a really helpful reminder. I'm of the nature to grow old, get sick, and die, and everything I have will be taken from me. All I have are my actions. So
Mhm.
that's a daily reminder. And then there's another teaching, 9 contemplations of Atisha, who I think lived around the 11th century.
Okay.
Um, and these contemplations are on death, and just the fact that we have less time to live than we did when we started this little conversation.
True, right?
Things like that, just like, oh yeah, just those little reminders.
That's
So anyway.
beautiful. And I will look that up. Thank you, because I know that some of my, my audience is going to be from different types of Buddhism. And so thank you. It's funny. You must have read my mind, because as you were before, when you were speaking, I was thinking, I will bring in definitely some of the Theravada learnings, but it would be helpful for me to bring in something from Tibetan. And there you go. So I will look.
The
I will look
Bardo
that
and
up.
the all
Mhm.
that, the Book of
Mhm.
the Dead.
What have we left? What have we left out there that we can be discussing?
I know, it just popped into my mind. Don't forget the joy. There's always joy. Don't miss the
Thank you.
joy.
Tell us more about, will you tell more about the joy? Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a teacher, James Barras, who does a class called Awakening Joy, which is really, really wonderful.
Mhm.
The that there we can find joy is really important, and there's joy everywhere. I mean, we're talking just like a cookie or a sunrise, or there's Venus in the sky this morning, right
Mhm.
now with the sun. I mean, before the sun rises, and it's beautiful. And to stop and be with the joy that's there. And because a lot of times we'll say, like that experience I have with my brother, we're
Mhm.
laughing. Does that mean I'm not? To be with what's right there. If there's grief, there's grief. But if there's joy, don't judge it. We
Mhm.
have a tendency, I shouldn't feel this way. There are people starving. I should, and it's like you're denying reality when you're not acknowledging what's present. And
Right.
cultivating joy is not it's a really great thing to do. It includes gratitude, and doesn't mean bad things or uncomfortable things don't happen. It just means that you're able to hold it with balance and equanimity.
I feel
So
like the joy can make us stronger.
mhm, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
If
yeah,
we can
and
get
there's
in the
always
middle of
joy.
something, appreciate a sunset or something.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That gives us strength for the time when the grief arises and it doesn't feel joyful.
Right, absolutely. Neuroscience, Rick Hanson, who's written Buddha's Brain, talks about that when we have to let in the good. When there is something really pleasant, be with it for 15, 20 seconds, which is not a lot, but it's longer than we usually spend on something. We're usually on to the next thing because it has a beneficial impact on our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it, as you were saying, it does strengthen and it fortifies and it kind of moves that negativity bias towards the middle, or
Right.
rather than, so it's really helpful.
And the research does show us that unfortunately sometimes we spend so much more time on negative thoughts, flashing them through our heads during the day, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's not a crime to feel joy even in the middle of a difficult time. In fact, it's a good thing.
Don't deny what's there. Don't deny what's present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it really comes to. People would love to hear listening to you forever, but I also understand that you have a life that doesn't include talking to me all day long about death. So,
although it is one of my favorite topics.
And I see why. And thank you, because you just make it so nice and so approachable. This is going to be so helpful for everyone.
Just be gentle with yourselves. Just I think that's so important. We're so hard on ourselves. We're so difficult. Just be kind. Like Sylvia Boorstein has a quote that she got from somewhere. Life can be so difficult. How can we be anything but kind?
That's beautiful.
This has been the Death Dhamma podcast with Margaret Maloney. Thank you for being here. Your reviews and comments are greatly appreciated. And please come find me on margaretmaloney.com. MargaretMeloni. And don't forget to check out Carpooling with Death, How Living with Death Will Make You Stronger, Wiser, and Fearless. Available in all your favorite formats over on Amazon. And most importantly, may you be well. May you be happy. May you be safe, at ease, and free from suffering. Bye for now.